all well. In this lecture, I'll be discussing support vector machine. Support vector machine can be used for both prediction and classification. In particular, it's effective for high-dimensional data sets. When we use it for prediction, the cost function is a trade-off between explaining training data and making coefficients small. When we use it for classification purposes, the goal is to separate points in best way while being as far away from points as possible. In this lecture, we focus on classification. As you can see in this slide on the left-hand side figure, we have two data sets and we want to separate them. So one question is, how can we choose hyperplanes? In this figure, you see three possible ways to separate these two data sets. To answer this, we can apply support vector machine, which maximizes the margin. The concept behind support vector machine is illustrated on the right-hand side figure. So we have two data sets. We want to separate them the best way. To do that, we define a margin, which is the distance between the negative hyperplane and the positive hyperplane. Support vector machine algorithms use a set of mathematical functions that are defined as the kernel. The function of kernel is to take data as input and transform it into another form. Kernel methods require a similarity function over pairs of data points. Different kernel functions can be specified for the decision function, and it can be linear or nonlinear. We will discuss both in this lecture. In the first example, we want to apply linear kernel function to a well-known data set for classification. We will be using the IRIS data set. This data set has three classes of 50 instances each, where each class refers to a type of iris plant. So we have three types of iris plants. One class is linearly separable from the other two. The latter are not linearly separable from each other. There are four attributes or features: sepal lengths, sepal widths, petal lengths, and petal widths. And in this example, we focus on the last two features, petal lengths and widths. The first step is to load the data. From sklearn library, we import data sets, and then we load iris, and we save it in a variable named iris. Then we need to divide x and y. X includes all features or independent variables, and y is the target value. Because we only want to focus on the last two, so we call iris.data, and the column index is 2 and 3. And then the target values are assigned to variable y. If we want to see class labels, we can apply unique method defined under numerical Python, and then we will see the values for classes. After we load the data, we divide the data into train and test samples using the train test split, which does this process in a random fashion. Then we define four variables, 2 for x, 2 for y, and then we apply the train test split function. By default, it assigns 75% to training sample and 25% to test, but we can change this default value using test underline size. And in this example, we want to assign 30% to the test sample. So it split the data in a stratified fashion using y as the class label. So stratify equal to y. And here I would like to talk about pre-processing functions defined under sklearn library. Before, we talked about pre-processing and standardizing data using list and writing a for loop. But there are some useful functions which are dedicated to pre-processing. In this example, we want to standardize features or independent variables. In machine learning, we usually don't assume any shape for variables. So standardizing the data can improve the performance of algorithms. So technically, we subtract mean from all data points and then divide them by the standard deviation. To do that, from sklearn.preprocessing, we import a standard scalar. Then we apply the transform method to both xtrain and xtest samples. Then we have the standardized data points. After applying this pre-processing technique, then we can call support vector machine algorithm. We pass kernel type and a tuning parameter, then we can see the result. So as you can see here, from sklearn.svm, we import svc, and we are passing two input argument, kernel, in this example linear, and c. So c parameter is a regularization parameter. It trades off correct classification of training set against maximization of decision functions margin. Now, after we apply the support vector machine to this data set, we want to visualize the result. Particularly for classification purposes, we want to see decision boundaries and how this algorithm separates data points. So to do that, we are going to use another library named MLExtend, which is the machine learning extension library, because it has several nice plotting functions that we can use for visualizing decision boundaries. So first we install it, and then we can get access to plot underlying decision underlying regions, which visualizes the decision boundary for classifiers, as long as we are dealing with two-dimensional data sets. It means that we have only two variables or features to classify the data. So let's implement this in a notebook, and you can see what the result look like. So first we need to import the data set. So from sklearn import datasets. Then we define a variable named iris, and then we assign the datasets dot load underline iris to this data. There is a typo here. Okay. Let's print iris. So you can see that it's an array with 4 columns because it has 4 attributes or features. And also you can see the target. So target values are assigned to iris.target. Now the next step is to divide features and or separate features and the target value. So I'm going to define 2 variables named x and y. X includes all independent variables or feature. Here is iris dot data, the last 2 column, so 2 and 3, and then the y variable contains the target value, so iris dot target. So let's run it and just let's print y. So you can see 0, 1, and 2, the class labels. So if we want to know the unique values, so we print class labels, then we apply the unique method under numerical Python. For the y variable, and now you can see the class labels are 0, 1, 2. Each represent different classes, different types of iris plants. Now we want to apply the standard scalar and pre-processing and splitting the data. So first we start with splitting the data in a random fashion. So from sklearn dot model underline selection, we want to import the train test split function, train underline test underline split. Then we define 4 variables, 2 for x, x underline train, x underline test, and 2 for y, y underline train, y underline test. Then we call train underline test underline split. We pass x and y. We want to change the default value, so test underline size, the proportion of sample data set, so 30% or 0.3, and split it in a stratified fashion, so stratify using y as a class label. Okay, we run it. Then we can standardize the features or independent variables using the standard scalar function. To get access to this function, from sklearn.preprocessing, we import a standard scalar. Then we define an object and assign a standard scalar to that object. Then x underline train underline std, or a standardized version, is equal to sc.transform. So we apply the transform method to x underline train, and we do the same for test data points. So x underline test underline std, we apply the transform method to x underline test. Let's run it. There's a typo here. Okay. So the error that we get here, this standard scalar instance is not fitted yet. Call fit with appropriate arguments before using this method. So here, after we define the object, it seems that we missed the fit part. So we call sc.fit. We pass xtrain as suggested here. So we call fit with appropriate argument before using this method, and then we run it. Okay. Now let's print the train data set. And you can see they are standardized, some positive, some negative values with 2 columns. Okay. Now we can apply the support vector machine algorithm. To do that, first we need to import it. So from sklearn.svm import svc, and then svm is equal to svc, and we pass 2 arguments. First, the type of kernel. In this example, we go with the linear kernel, and the regularization parameter c equal to 1. Let's run it. Now we can apply the fit function. So svm.fit, we pass x and y. So x underline train, the standardized version, and y underline train. So we have the result. We created this object. We trained the algorithm using the training sample. Now we want to visualize the result, and that's the part that we can use the machine learning extension library and the plotting features. So from moxtend.plotting, we import plot underline decision underline regions. Wait, make sure we don't have any typo. So machine learning extend plotting. Okay, let's run it. Okay. Now we need to stack variables. Okay. Now, as you can see here, before I run the codes, I would like to talk about stacking arrays. So we discussed this briefly when we were working with numerical Python package. So we can stack arrays in sequence. But here you can see VStack and HStack. HStack stacks arrays column-wise, and VStack stack arrays row-wise. That's why in order to combine the train and test sets, we are using VStack, which is the row-wise, and for Y, we are going with the column-wise or HStack. So after we stack arrays, we combine both train and test data sets. Then we call the plot underline decision region library. And we can see the results. Okay. Now we can define the combined, X underline combined, the standard or standardized version. So we call VStack. Then we pass X underline train underline std and the test set. So X underline train underline std. So when we apply it, let's print it. Now we expect an array with 2 columns because we have 2 variables and they are combined, both the train and test data points. Okay, here we go. Now we need to do the same for the target value or Y variable. So Y underline combine. We use the HStack method defined under numerical Python. And then we pass Y underline train and Y underline test. If you run it and print this array, you can see only 0, 1, 2 and just 1 column. It's a one-dimensional array. Now we can call the plot decision regions function. So plot underline decision underline regions. We pass X combined and Y combined variables. The classifier CLF is SVM that we just trained, and this function can be applied for any other classifiers. You just need to change the classifier with this argument here, CLF. Then we can assign X label, Y label, and legend. So PLT, referring to matplot library, dot X label is pedal lengths. We want to emphasize that this is the standardized. The same for Y label, which refers to pedal width. This is also the standardized. We can call the legend method PLT legend, and we can specify its location. So location equal to upper left. Then we want to show the graph. Okay, let's run it, and this is the result. First, you can see that this is a linear version of support vector machine. We have 3 classes, each with separate colors. You can see the decision boundaries and also the data points. This was the first example. Now in our second example, we want to use nonlinear support vector machine classification method. First, we randomly generate data sets. Then we want to plot the data set. And then we apply the support vector machine. We change the kernel function and we visualize the decision boundaries. Okay, as you can see in this slide, I'm using the numerical Python matplot library and the randn function, which generates random numbers from a standard normal distribution. So we are generating 200 rows and 2 columns. So we have 2 variables or 2 features and 200 observations. So this is our x variable or x underline XOR. Now to generate the target values, here we are using logical underline XOR. So it applies the logical XOR to the elements of x and y. So we apply this method to the first and second column of x underline XOR. So it returns Boolean values, so it will be true and false. Now based on the true and false, we want to assign values. If it is true, we assign 1, and if it is false, we assign -1. To do that, we can use the var statement under numerical Python. So np.var apply to y underline XOR 1 if it is true and -1 if it's not. So it returns elements chosen from y XOR depending on the condition. When we generate x and y, so features and the target value, now we want to plot them using a scatter method. So plt.scatter. So first we want to show all data points whose class is 1. So x underline XOR where y underline XOR is equal to 1. And then we want to show all data point whose target value is -1. And we want to change their color. We want to assign label as well. And that's what you see here. Color equal to blue. It means that the color will be blue. Marker equal to x, where the target value is equal to 1. And we change the color to red, and marker will be a square, where the target value is -1. And then we can modify this plot using xlim or ylim, which shows the scale for x and y axis. So let's say we want to define minimum and maximum. So on x-axis, the minimum value would be -3 through 3 as the maximum value. The same for y-axis. We also want to change the location for legend. Here we go with best, and then we show the result. So far we just randomly generated a data set. We plotted. Now we can apply the support vector machine. So we call svc and then we pass 2 input arguments, kernel. So one of the most commonly used nonlinear kernel function is radial based function, RBF. And then the other one is the regularization parameter C. Then we can apply the fit method to x and y, and we call the plot underline decision regions function to visualize the decision boundaries and the result of the support vector machine, and we show the plot. Now let's implement it in a Python and you can see the result. So first we need to generate the data. X underline XOR. We are using the random function randn to generate 200 by 2 matrix. Then we want to generate the target value y underline XOR. To do that, we apply the logical XOR to the first and second column of x variable. So x underline XOR to the first column and to the second column. Where they are positive. So it returns Boolean results. So now let's print y underline XOR. First off, the data structure is an array and you can see true or false. Now we want to use these Boolean values and define the class labels. To do that, we use the where statement under numerical Python. So y underline XOR is equal to np.where. We apply it to y underline XOR. If it is true, the value is 1. If it is false, the value is -1. Now let's print this variable and you can see. For example, for the first two elements, we have true and false, and then you see 1 and -1. Then you have two trues, then you see two ones. And now we treat it as a target value or class labels. So we have two classes, 1 and -1. Now, before we apply any classifier algorithm, let's plot this data. So we use the matplotlib library, plt.scatter. First, we want to plot all data points whose target value is equal to 1. So x underline XOR such that y underline XOR is equal to 1 for the first column and the same for the second column. So x underline XOR such that y underline XOR is equal to 1. This is the second column. We can assign a color, C equal to blue. Marker is X, so we see X's. And we also assign a label. And we see that in the legend. So label is 1. We do the same for the other class. So plt is scatter. So all x underline XOR whose target value is equal to -1. For the first column and for the second column. This time the color can be red. Marker is squares. S and label is equal to -1. Okay, let's run it. Make sure we don't have a typo. Okay. The first typo. Okay, that's what we see. Two data sets, two different colors. Now we can modify this color. We can define the scale for x-axis. Let's say we just want to have all the data between -3 and 3. The same for y variable. We can also see the legend. So plt.xlim, then we can define the range for x-axis between -3 and 3. The same for y-axis between -3 and 3. Then we want to have a legend, plt.legend. Then location is, say, best. You can change it to upper left, upper right. Then let's run it. So that's the result. Now we have legend. If I change it to upper left, for example, then it's on the left side. Okay, so that's the data set that we are dealing with. And you can see that we can not find a linear classifier which separates this two data set. That's why we want to apply the nonlinear kernel function for our support vector machine model. So I call SVC. This time the kernel is RBF, radial basis function, and C is equal to 1. I'm going to change the C value and you can see how it changes the result later on. So then we can apply the fit method. We pass x underline XOR and the target variables, y underline XOR. Okay, we run it. Now we have the result for our support vector machine. Now we want to visualize decision boundaries. So we call plot underline decision underline regions function. The classifier is SVM. Now we want to add legend. Location is upper left. And we want to show the result. Let's run it. With this, you can see the legend. You can also see the result of the support vector machine classifier when we are using a nonlinear kernel function. And now I want to change this C value. Okay, let's change it to 10 and see what the result would be. So almost all the blue data points are correctly separated, and that shows the trade-off that we were talking about. The trade-off between correct classification based on the training sample and the maximization of decision functions margin. Overall, when we are working with predictive models, we want to avoid overfitting. And with this example, I wrap up our discussion about support vector machine.